Quiet, numbskulls, I'm broadcasting.
The medical marijuana. The medical marijuana. Radio show. The medical marijuana for you and me. Ah, yeah, the medical marijuana. Whoa, 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 ah, yeah, the medical. It's the medical marijuana show. You will know.
I want to talk to you. I want to talk to you. Hey, boy, don't feel my world untrue. Yeah, I want to talk to you. My world can be true if you do what I tell you to. I want to talk to you.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome once again to Medical Marijuana Radio. This edition is for the 2nd of April, 2016. I'm your host, Larry Love. We're here every week to bring you the latest information on medical cannabis and adult use, recreational use cannabis from all over the globe. This week, a great interview with Reggie Gaudino from Steep Hill Labs. Reggie is a scientist and an activist, really, I believe, for cannabis, and they've developed at Steep Hill a genetic testing kit so that you can take a couple little clippings from very early seedling, like the second set of leaves, send it to them, and they can tell you if it's a male or not. So that means if it's not a male, then it's a female. So this saves a lot of time and money. So we'll be talking to Reggie in the second half of the show. But first, as always, I have news for you.
I've got news for you.
And if you're listening to this show early on Saturday, don't forget that tonight in Santa Fe, it's the first BYOC Bring Your Own Cannabis event for medical cannabis patients only. That's at the Rock and Rollers roller skating rink from 8 until midnight or 1 p.m. Food trucks, a band is playing, so check it out. But as far as news is concerned, this is from the Sun-Times. There's a new study that says that CBD cannabinoid found in marijuana induces rapid antidepressant-like effects. Again, this is from the Sun-Times. New research published online in the Neuropharmacology shows cannabidiol, CBD, a non-psychoactive compound found in marijuana, induces rapid-acting antidepressant-like effects. CBD has already been shown to greatly help reduce seizures in epilepsy patients, and now the cannabinoid shows promise for people suffering with depression, as reported by marijuana.com. Researchers conducted behavioral and neurochemical studies on surgically modified OBX mice following CBD treatment and found CBD reversed the OBX-induced hyperactivity and anhedonia, which is the inability to feel pleasure. Boy, we don't want that, do we? The rapid onset of CBD's antidepressant effects are particularly of interest because at present, nearly all pharmaceutical antidepressants must be taken for weeks before patients feel the effects kick in. So it sounds to me like cannabis can give people relief a lot quicker than the pharmaceuticals. Now, over in Colorado, where everybody looks to for advice from other states and so forth, a very bad precedent hopefully will not be set, and they're trying to cap all products to a 17% THC. This report is part of the Cannabis Show with Ricardo Baca. that played the other day. Cannabis experts Rye Pritchard talks about the THC limits that would kill the legal extract business. Here is this report.
Some in Colorado are proposing a THC limit on all cannabis products, that we're talking 15, 16% max. You've worked in the industry for years, so tell us from your perspective, especially generally speaking, what could this mean for legal marijuana in Colorado?
I mean, hopefully nothing. Hopefully it goes nowhere. But if it did go through, I mean, it would dramatically change the landscape because, as you mentioned earlier, most of the products are higher than that. Most modern cannabis has been bred specifically to be higher than 15% THC. So to me, it feels like it would be a massive step backwards in terms of the plant and the product. I don't really understand it.
And a step backwards because, I mean, you talk about breeding for potency. Is it a step? Would it be a step backwards because so many strides have been made? Is that necessarily better pot?
I mean, it's more. I don't even know how the industry can go backwards. I don't even know how this would be a workable thing because there's, if you look at the numbers, there's probably only 10 or 20% of strains that could even test that low, and normally things that test that low are because they're grown really poorly, or a variety of negative factors that would cause something to test that low. It's just not very common. So I think about a 15% THC product, and to me that says a poor product.
Oh, interesting. Okay, like maybe it wasn't grown properly or something.
Yeah, for the majority of things, if they're a THC dominant cannabinoid profile, they should be higher than 15%. Generally, if it's a CBD product, that's a whole different argument.
Sure.
Which maybe that's part of what this is about.
Well, I mean, you are our resident concentrates columnist, so let's talk about what this could mean for concentrates. I mean, the average extract in Colorado tests higher than 60%, many more than 70, 80%, right? So do you think that the people behind these initiatives are trying to kill concentrates in Colorado?
I mean, I think that's a pretty fair guess. Obviously the groups are anti-cannabis groups primarily that are proposing it. So I think that it's a very thinly veiled attempt at doing that. It would effectively eliminate every product on the market right now, except for a very tiny minority.
Every concentrated product.
Yeah, certainly every concentrated product. I mean, I think about how to make a 15% concentrate, and you would have to dilute it because the whole point of concentrating something is that you're increasing the levels of the things that were in the first thing. So it's very I don't even know how you would do it. You would have to dilute it or something, which as a consumer would scares the crap out of me. So.
I know. Well, let's talk about that because you and I did talk about it yesterday, and did you say something along the lines of even if it was 4% THC flower, that could still very well end up testing higher than 15%?
100%.
As a concentrate.
I mean, I literally don't know what you would have to, what kind of starting material you would have to have in order to end up with a concentrate that tests 15%. Certainly not a raw concentrate. Like I said, you would pretty much have to dilute it.
And you're also super plugged in the industry. I'm curious, what are you hearing people saying about this proposal? I guess I just heard about it on Friday very loosely, and I wasn't quite sure where it was, and then heard more. I saw a copy of the proposed bill and the ballot initiative on Monday, and that's when we got the story up. But what is the industry saying about these proposals?
I mean, I think the industry is pretty much laughing at it. I think the industry pretty much thinks that this is clearly written by people who don't understand the ins and outs of how things work. They don't understand, for example, that the majority of products are higher than that, or maybe they do. And if they do, then it's, like I said, it's just a very obvious attempt at banning concentrates or banning the majority of products and making it a very narrow market that's not appealing to people. So yeah,
crazy times we're living in, right, Pritchard?
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's from the cannabis.co. The Cannabis is part of the Denver Post. And there is a longer show up there if you go up there to listen to Rye Pritchard and Richard Baca talk about these things. Now, my comment when I read the article that came out last week, trying to dummy down cannabis, was that what are those politicians drinking up there? Why not ban hard liquor, wine, and only sell 3.2 beer? I don't think those politicians would like that at all. So, I mean, it's really hypocritical and ridiculous, and hopefully it won't happen. On the brighter side of things, people in New York just started their program this year. Many dispensaries are open, not many, but the few that are opening have opened. And here's a girl that's with epilepsy showing progress just after starting medical cannabis treatment for her epilepsy. This is good news.
Medical marijuana has now been legal for people who need it for about 3 months in New York. For one little girl battling epilepsy, however, it's meant some real progress. News 10 ABC's Trishna Begum has the story.
This is the medical marijuana that Haley Hilt uses. This is the dropper they use. This is an oil form. They'll drop a few drops in something like yogurt to give the medicine to Haley. Now, this little bottle right here comes at a big price tag.
Are you smiling?
It was a moment so precious, Mom Melissa Hilt had to save it on her phone.
She rode a tricycle at school for the first time. She's now sitting up.
Something Melissa never thought was possible because of Haley's seizures.
She is awake. She's alert. She's playful.
And she's getting stronger. Haley's able to stand up with some help and play with her siblings. Melissa says the changes are because of medical marijuana.
Oh my God, we've met her. That's probably the best way I can describe it.
Melissa spent a long time fighting to make medical marijuana legal in the state, but now that it's here, the battle hasn't stopped.
You know, it's pretty sad that people are being forced to choose between, you know, their health or their child's health and putting food on the table.
Melissa spends about $365 for a month's supply.
We're very fortunate, very fortunate. We've had so much support from our family, from our church.
The price is high because it's there isn't the demand.
But companies are hoping the patient numbers grow. Right now, about 2,000 patients are registered statewide, and only half of those have actually purchased the medicine.
Well, I think down the road, as there's more patients, all the prices are going to go down.
Beautiful, smart girl.
Melissa says the benefits are evident through her daughter's progress. Next month, she'll be in D.C. to meet with lawmakers to talk about decriminalizing marijuana and getting insurance companies to start paying for it.
Getting insurance companies to start paying for it is certainly something that is needed. I don't know that it's going to happen real soon, but it is real medicine and should be treated as a real medicine, just like pharmaceuticals. And this is even better than pharmaceuticals. Patients, you know, how do they know how to use cannabis for their illnesses and for their different conditions? Here's a group of medical cannabis patients who get together and they trade treatment tips.
Tonight, medical marijuana patients are collaborating to help educate each other on different forms of cannabis. They held the first of a series of discussions today at the Speakeasy Vape Lounge in Colorado Springs. News 5's Jesse Mitchell was there. So what do they hope to accomplish with this, Jesse?
These patients want to create a medical marijuana network that allows them to find the best treatments for their ailments. With laws limiting the kinds of advice they can get from professionals, they say it's imperative that they take it upon themselves to help one another.
If I want to go to sleep or I'm in serious pain, I'm reaching for the heaviest indica I can find.
Dozens gathered at the Speakeasy Vape Lounge to listen, learn, and share about medical marijuana and cannabis, a service they're hard-pressed to find elsewhere.
It's against the law for any dispensaries to tell you any information saying, hey, try this for this medicine, or this for this disease, or try this for this. So no one, you get your medical card and you don't see that doctor for another year.
A group of patients and marijuana entrepreneurs got together to organize this educational series, creating a forum amongst patients. The owner of Speakeasy, Jamin Johnson, says all too often he sees people new to the state who are unfamiliar with the wide variety of marijuana products and their uses.
If they try the wrong strain or go the wrong way with it, it may be something where they decide it's not for them when it could benefit them, or maybe they have an adverse reaction they weren't looking for.
Army vet Dave Gambrell says he's already learning new ways to combat his PTSD by talking to other patients, and he's looking forward to working with other veterans who need help finding the right treatment for them.
It's made me understand and be aware of what others are using, getting positive feedback, and being able to utilize that within my own personal medication on a daily basis.
Organizers are using different cannabis clubs around town to host the meetings, highlighting the venues as a positive space for the marijuana community. And they hope to grow into a community of activists that take medical patients' issues to the Capitol. The next meeting is April 9th at the Dab Lounge.
Where else are we going to learn? We have to talk to each other, educate each other. We need to educate physicians We need to educate lawmakers and law regulators. I think we, as the patients who have been using this great medicine, need to move forward and educate other people. Now, keeping it light before we take a real short break, and then we're going to come back with Reggie Gaudino from Steep Hill Labs. Keeping it light, here's Hillary Clinton on the last week with Jimmy Kimmel talking about pot and her emails.
Over the last several months, we've learned a lot about you. And I think more than anything, we've learned that your emails are very boring.
Yes.
I mean, I thought we would get more out of this, but this is one that I'd like to go through. This is to Lauren Gelotti. As you said, I was just thinking about this last week. I'm going to order some tomorrow. Apples. So they'll be in your office when you get back from UNGA? What's UNGA?
The UN General Assembly.
Oh, it stands for something. I thought it was some African nation, but for some reason, my supplier just stopped sending them after the new year. I'll set up an account. Now, this is about pot, right? This is a code. This is how you order marijuana in code.
Yeah, this is really top secret stuff. When I was senator from New York, one of the great joys was advocating for all the different businesses in New York. And New York produces a lot of apples. And
hence the name, the Big Apple.
Hence the name, the Big Apple. Mm-hmm. And so I always kept fresh apples in my office for people to take advantage of. And we hadn't gotten any apples for a while, so I was wondering where the apples were. I mean, I am sure someone could make a lot out of that, but that is the case. It was about real apples from New York.
Okay, not pot then. Why do you disagree with Bernie Sanders about decriminalizing marijuana at the federal level?
Well, look, I think what the states are doing right now needs to be supported, and I absolutely support all the states that are moving toward medical marijuana, moving toward absolutely legalizing it for recreational use. But I want to see what the states learn from that experience, because there are still a lot of questions that we have to answer at the federal level. What I've said is, let's take it off the what's called Schedule 1.
I noticed your hand motion.
Let's take it off the Schedule 1 and put it on a lower schedule so that we can actually do research about it. There's some great evidence about what marijuana can do for people who are in cancer treatments, who have other kinds of chronic diseases, who are suffering from intense pain. There's great, great anecdotal evidence, but I want us to start doing the research because, Jimmy, suppose you're taking 2 or 3 prescription drugs and you don't know what dosage you should be mixing with everything, and so let's find out, and then let's make that available, and let's do more.
Well, you'll be happy to know Guillermo is working on a research project right now.
That's right.
And he's going to report his...
I want to hear from him. I'm accepting information from everybody.
You have received an endorsement from Snoop Dogg, which is really key.
Yes, I have. That's right.
When we had your husband, President Clinton, on the show, he said, I asked him about UFOs in Area 51, and if he looked in, because if I was president, that's the first thing I do. I go right into those files and see what was going on.
Right.
And he said that he did do that.
Yes.
And that he didn't find anything.
Well, I'm gonna do it again.
Yeah, why not?
Right? And there's a new name. It's unexplained aerial phenomenon.
Unexplained aerial phenomenon, really?
Yep, UAP. That's the latest nomenclature.
I like the old one. I like UFO. I don't know why.
Well, I think we can use them interchangeably, but I would like us to go into those files and hopefully make as much of that public as possible. If there's nothing there, let's tell people there's nothing there.
What if there is something there?
Well, if there is something there, unless it's a threat to national security, I think we ought to share it with the public.
Well, what if everybody's all hopped up on medical marijuana and everybody gets paranoid? I would love it.
That's why I want more research.
If you share it with me, I'll decide what is the best course of action. I really have my ear to the ground.
Well, I'm more than happy to do that.
Do you love clicking buttons and subscribing to things? Then click the button to subscribe to my channel, and you'll finally be happy.
That's the Jimmy Kimmel channel on YouTube that plays nice little clips, and I thank them for allowing me, even though they don't know it, to play that clip. But of course, Hillary wants to do more research. There's plenty of research out there. We've talked about it before. Spain, Israel, #1 place in the world for research. It's all out there, and we haven't been able to do it here because of the Schedule 1. It would not allow people to do research. But, we need to look at the research that's been done for the last 50 or 60 years in Israel and Spain and other places. So we will be right back after this with Reggie Gaudino and our little talk. We'll be right back.
The medical marijuana. The medical marijuana. Radio show.
Hi, this is Steve D'Angelo, and you are listening to Medical Marijuana Radio.
And we're back. And online today, I have Reggie Gaudino from Steep Hill Labs. Reggie is a scientist and developed the Gen Kit for sexing your plants when you start from seed. Welcome to Medical Marijuana Radio, Reggie.
Thank you, Larry. It's good to be here.
Obviously, this is a major breakthrough. I think this is as important as discovering new cannabinoids and as discovering new conditions that our wonderful plant is good for and works for. How did you get into developing this scientific way of sexing your plants?
Well, let me start by saying that I have a great team of people, and it wasn't just me who developed it. So I always like to give some credit to the people that helped make this possible and the other things that go along with Gen Kit possible. But early on, we identified the need for a program that allowed growers and breeders to do their job better and faster. And so one of the things that we identified was the fact that there's nothing equivalent to a marker-assisted breeding program in cannabis, right? So every other commercially important cash crop has genetics behind it and marker-assisted breeding, which essentially is the ability to follow specific genes and traits at the DNA level so that you can shorten your generation times, right? So, and the reason why that was important to me is because I also have an intellectual property background, and in order to be able to put a stake in the ground for a unique medical strain, one really needs the ability to be able to get to a stable or true breeding phenotype. And so the first thing you need to do the first thing you need to do along those lines in development is to be able to identify the sexes of your plants so that you can find strong males, strong females, so that you can then do some very, directed breeding. The information that we started with for the sex test was actually stuff that was found in the literature. It's some of the information that we started with has been published since the 1990s. And what we did was we found in the literature some of the research that was directed towards identifying cannabis sex. We took that as our baseline and then developed a unique test from that. So we started just by doing what any good scientist will do: go to the literature. You spend a few hours in the library. It helps you tremendously in the lab. And from what was published, we optimized and actually used our sequencing to identify new sequences that would give us a better response in our lab test. So one thing I think it's very important to say is that in the course of our, in the course of our research, we found that there's been some controversy as to what constitutes a male in cannabis, and our own research actually supported that. So we like to say at Steve Hill that there actually is no such thing as a female in cannabis, right? So you either have a male, which is identified by a Y chromosome, or you have hermaphrodites. So, and the reason why I say that is because all females, when stressed, or I should say not all, but the majority of cannabis females, whether it's cannabis grown for hemp or cannabis grown for the drug varieties, they all have this component that under stressful conditions, they will be able to produce male flowers. We have to remember that at one point, hemp/cannabis was a monoecious plant, which means that it had both male and female sexes on the same plant. Since then, there's been kind of like a sexual dimorphism that's occurred. There's some, question as to how or why that occurred, but you went from having male and female flowers on the same plant to actually having two specific plants, one that was male and one that was everything else. And so our sex test is actually designed to identify the Y chromosome, and so it identifies what is genetically a male, but it does not yet tell you whether or not the non-males have the propensity to become hermaphrodites and possibly also turn out male flowers. The industry itself knows that this occurs under stress, and so right now we are looking into if we can find that trigger, that stress trigger that would identify whether or not you're about to go into a hermaphroditic cycle, but that's a little bit tougher. But it's important that the cannabis industry realize that, right? So that there are males, and then everything that is not a male in cannabis has the propensity to, or the potential at least, to become a male flower bearing plant.
So the DNA that's in a seed, when it's just a seed, can it be identified as a male? I mean, is it already identified as what sex it is, or does the stress and the environment make it a female after X amount of time?
Once the DNA is put into a seed, it's the DNA. So you can change females in a non-genetic way. So by adding certain chemicals, you can stress the plant so that it brings out the male program. So that's already there in the hermaphrodites. And a male is a male from the very beginning. So there's nothing that will happen environmentally that will change the DNA, but how the DNA is expressed can change. And that's why it's very interesting. You don't see, if you have a Y chromosome, it stops the female program. So if there is a Y chromosome, it will not produce female flowers. However, if there's not a Y chromosome, it can produce either male or female flowers depending on the conditions. But that's there from the very beginning in the seed.
Okay, so all right, so I do understand that. So what you're identifying after the second or third set of leaves, I'm not sure which, is you're identifying the male chromosome. Okay, yes. So you can tell that that's a male. Yes. And if you tell us that that's a male and you grow that out, there's no way that's going to be a female ever. You can't stress a male plant and make it a female, but you can stress a female plant to make it a male.
Right. So there are some people in the industry who claim that they have been able to turn male plants into female. I have never seen any evidence of that, and there's been nothing in the literature that says that as well. So what might be is that they think they're actually turning a hermaphrodite that has been expressing the male program into a female. That's most likely what's happening. Again, without being able to identify and get my hands on those plants that they say they've turned from male to female, it's not possible to say. You really do need to look at the genetics of the plant. Is there a Y chromosome? Are there Y chromosome sequences? If not, then you may have a female or hermaphrodite that is already expressing the male program, right? So, and then those would very easily turn back into a regular female flower, right? So because it already has the female flower characteristics. There's a paper that came out in 2014 that actually does a very good job of showing the full spectrum of hermaphroditism for what are quote unquote females, right? So they've actually done the experiment where they've looked at whether or not there's a Y chromosome or not through a number of plants that express various ratios of female to male flowers, from only female flowers to only male flowers. And in that spectrum, you can see that there's a whole range of very female to almost completely male, but yet they have no Y chromosome. So technically, they are not males. And then when you look at a plant that has a Y chromosome, nobody in science has ever been able to identify a Y chromosome bearing plant that has a female flower.
Okay, so back in the old days, and I'm 65, and I've been, I probably grew my first plant in the early 70s. We used to, you had a 50-50 chance of getting a female or a male. Okay, but now with all the inbreeding and all the, hybrids and so forth, is that percentage changed? Is it 33% of maybe having a hermaphrodite involved with this? Because there's a lot of hermaphrodism going on out there. What do you think the percentages are now when you're popping seeds?
Well, from the data that we've generated, and we've done close to 10,000 tests since last year when we introduced GenKit, we actually see that the numbers are still right around 50-50, right? So when you actually deal with naturally naturally pollinated flowers, right? So you take a male and a female, or you take some sort of land race kind of thing, you'll see that it's around 50-50, 55-45, it's right there. So now the difference is that, so people who are now selling feminized seeds, right? So those are the seeds where you take a female, you treat it with some chemical, and by female, I actually mean hermaphrodite, right? So, and you treat it with either gibberellic acid or silver thiocyanate, and then you produce pollen from that otherwise female appearing plant.
Mm-hmm.
Now, because of the genetics involved, you're making pollen from what was strictly an XX organism, right? So a female organism, no Y chromosome. And so the only pollen you can get out of that is XX, right? So you're forcing female type pollen from the plant, and so thus you can only send onto the next generation X chromosomes. So because of that feminized seed production, there is a propensity now for two things to happen. In a cross that uses feminized pollen, or you could only get females, and then you also increase the likelihood of hermaphrodism, because you're selecting for the trait that actually gave you the ability to make pollen from that otherwise female, right? So two things are happening by the use of feminized seeds. You are kind of skewing the results. You're selecting for only females, which in the long term is a bad thing, because sex was actually developed in nature for a reason. It's the way we correct our DNA, right? So when you have two individuals that have similar DNA come together, and then you have sexual reproduction, what ends up happening is the two chromosomes from each parent, or one of the two chromosomes from each parent, get together, and then in the process of replication, it actually corrects mistakes that might have accumulated by comparing to another fresh copy. And so the whole idea behind eliminating sexual reproduction by, either cloning, or B, by using the use of feminized seeds, you've actually kind of short-circuited nature's program to keep DNA healthy, right? So, and again, you increase the likelihood, because every time you do the feminized seed thing, those that pop the male flowers quicker are the ones that will then end up producing the pollen that goes into the thing, right? So to the next generation. So every time you do it, you actually increase the level of hermaphrodism possible, or autoflowering possible. So
feminized seeds are really screwing up the gene pool for the future.
Well, I don't want to say it, parts of the gene pool. Let's put it as parts of the gene pool, because in a very real way, it actually helps develop some of the traits that we want, right? So, but because you have a strong female and you want to keep that phenotype, I'm not gonna lie, one of the best ways to do that is by self-crossing, right? So this way you get to where you want to be faster. The genes that you're interested in have a higher tendency to be in the correct form, because they came from a self-cross, with the mother, from a mother whose pollen contributor was also the mother, right? So it's a great way to lock in good traits. However, it does weaken the gene pool in the long run, because now you're losing the hybrid vigor that comes from out crossing and some of these other things. So, so in a way, it does weaken the gene pool, but it also there's a necessity for it in some respects as well to be able to identify and get to the favorable traits quicker. So it's one of those things where you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't, kind of thing. So
right. I get that. And do you feel that a feminized seed plant that you grow is not as vigorous as a regular feminized plant? Not feminized, but a regular female plant.
Well, it depends on that's one of those questions that it's kind of loaded, right? So if you start with good genetics and you do a feminized cross, then you may lose some of that hybrid vigor. But if you started with good genetics, then the plant should be relatively healthy and vigorous. You could also theoretically start with bad genetics and do a regular cross and end up with a hybrid whose vigor is no better or worse than something that came from a feminized seed cross, right? So it really depends on the starting material. But in general, what you typically see is from an outcross, you see a much more vigorous and robust F1 generation, which is the first generation after that cross, than you would from a self-cross of a feminized seed.
Okay.
Generally.
Got you on that. So, all right. So basically, you've done over 10,000 of these genetic tests. You getting feedback from your clients, or is it most of it been in-house testing? And what's your percentage? Your website says 99%.
Right. So, we have we've been very successful. We've had a lot of good feedback. To be honest, we've had a couple of instances where we label something as a not male, because we try to be scientific, we label it as male or not male, right? So, and the reason why we do that is because to give the consumer some sort of cue, right? So if it's not male, that means it could be anything from pure female to a hermaphrodite, right? So we always tell everybody that if you get a result that doesn't say it's a male, you need to be careful and watch the plants anyway, as you would normally do, because under stressful conditions, temperature, salinity, drought, the plant will throw off male flowers because it's trying to save itself from imminent death. And in any plant, when the stress gets to the point where the plant feels it's dying, its first response is to make the next generation of seed to be able to survive long term. So in our hands, we have had a couple of cases where people have called us back and said, hey, you missed one. And but we have yet to actually have anybody bring us the resultant tissue from that so that we can compare it to the original. So one of the things that we try to do is we built the program in such a way that it's very easy to track your plants, and for us to be able, and we save all of the results for up to a year afterwards, so that if anybody comes back to us and they say, hey, you got it wrong, we can do that analysis. And when we've got it wrong, we've admitted it, right? So there was a period of time where when we were having some reporting problems, it wasn't necessarily a science problem, but at the end of the day, the user experience is the same. They got the wrong result because our IT services that were putting these reports on the line was not doing it correctly. And we had a number of clients who said, hey, you got it wrong. And when we went back and we looked, we understood why. So
it was like human error. It wasn't scientific error. It was human error?
Yes, it was. But at the end of the day, that doesn't help the guy whose crop just got screwed, right? So, and we were very vocal about it and apologized and offered these people, whatever we could to help them out in terms of, free testing this year, and and we take that very seriously. But the science behind it is pretty rock solid, right? So it's based on decades worth of already known information. We use that information as the baseline to develop our own tests. We did a lot of validation in-house, and right now we have data that shows that we are about 99.5 to 99.7% accurate over the course of 10,000 tests.
the reason I think this is so important is obviously if people are growing inside, they're going to save money on nutrients, on time, on lights. So I mean, I believe Steep Hill charges $130 for a kit, which is 8 tests.
Right.
So that's under $20 a test.
And if you buy it in bulk, so we now have a bulk program where that price is even further reduced. So what we realized, unfortunately, after the fact was, a kit that has 8 tests is probably not all that useful for a large grower or breeder. So we've worked this year on getting a bulk package together that further reduces the price so that we can make it much easier for the larger grower or breeders.
And for patients, I mean, basically, I do have a lot of licensed producers that listen to the show as well. But we deal with a lot of patients. We're trying to educate patients and so forth. So for patients, I think that it's a very reasonable, for under $20 to get your males out or isolate your male in case you want to use it, to breed. So I think that it's really very, very nominal, and it's going to save people a lot of time and money. Now, on the internet, a few years ago, actually, I saw a technique that people I think may have come from Jamaica, and this is where you look at the seed, and then if the seed has, I think it might be called the volcano method, a little indentation on the bottom. Do you know have you heard about this or seen the video?
I have not actually, but now that you mentioned it, I'm going to go test it. So I will go look for it and see how it stands up to our genetic test. It'll be very interesting to do.
I'll send you a link to the YouTube video. They show different seeds, and the ones that have like a little volcano indentation on the bottom where it's come off of the plant supposedly has a very high percentage of being a female. Okay. Then I'm not sure if that's a Jamaican way, but there's supposedly, and I asked this question to one of the Steep Hill guys when you first came to Albuquerque a year and a half or so ago about a Jamaican way of testing to see whether there was some kind of system that Jamaicans have, and your cohort wouldn't answer the question because he said you have a non-disclosure agreement in Jamaica with somebody. So do you know what I'm talking about?
We did at what we still do, I think, have a joint development non-disclosure thing with UTech University in Jamaica, where we're trying to we have one of actually a couple of our remote testing units that does potency remotely there, and we were helping them set up a university training program for cannabis science and stuff like that. So, but again, so this is, I had never heard about it until you had mentioned it. So, and it was probably either Don Land or Kimron who were our people over there. And neither of them mentioned it to me. So, but I will definitely, if you send me the link, I'll look into it and I'll talk to them. And it'd be very interesting to see whether or not there is correlation between that method and our genetics.
Absolutely. So, let me just ask you this, and I'll wrap this up in a couple of minutes. But did you find that there was any difference in testing the first few leaves as opposed to letting it go to the 5th, 6th, or 7th set?
Okay, so we actually recommend the second, true leaf. And so when we first started the test, we started with the cotyledons, and the cotyledons can be used, but I'll be honest, it was a lot of work for us. It required much more rigorous and time-consuming DNA extraction methods, because the cotyledon is actually something that's put down by the mom. It's mostly starch. It's there to help support the initial growth of the plant, and so there's very little DNA in it compared to a true leaf. The reason why we don't say go with the first true leaf is because we don't want anybody to pull off half of a leaf and then have the plant die, right? So the reason why we say the second true leaf is if you pull off half of the second true leaf, you have the first leaf and half of the second leaf, and then the plant's going to have a very good chance of survival. So we're actually trying to have people not like destroy their seedlings. Sure. Right. So that was why we went with the second true leaf. The reality is if we wanted to, it would be more expensive for the customer because of the extra labor and reagents involved. But we could do it as early as the cotyledon. It's just that we were trying to keep the price down and make it so that there was less of a chance that the plant would be compromised.
Gotcha. So, how much of a leaf do you need to send in with the kit?
Like honestly, we use such a little piece that if you just ripped off or cut off the very little point, of the second leaf, or maybe just a little bit more than the point, a couple of millimeters back from the tip, that's more than enough for us. So it actually does not require very much DNA on our part to do the test. And I would like to take this opportunity to say also that one of the things that really hampered adoption of this methodology was everybody thought that we were using it to steal the genetics, right? And the way we do the test, we don't do any sequencing. We amplify a very small piece of DNA that we have already identified as being Y chromosome specific, and that's all we do.
So you're looking for one thing, you identify it, and that's it.
That's right. Right.
And
so,
what's the turnaround time when somebody sends in, their sample?
From the time that we get it, right? So, and the reason why I say it that way is because we've had people say, "Hey, I sent it to you 2 days ago. I don't have my results yet." Well, when you send it to us, it takes 2 days for the mail to get to us, right? So, but within once we get it in the door, the samples are posted typically within 48 hours on our website.
I see. So that's the way you log in and you get your sample. You don't have to wait for a return email or anything like that. All right.
Exactly.
So Steep Hill has labs in what states now?
We have labs in New Mexico, in Washington, California. We have licensed labs and by that, so we have a licensing program where we have our science in other states, but we can't be there because of residency requirements. And those states are Nevada, Colorado, Maryland. We're going into Maryland, and we are in the process of putting a lab in Oregon as well. We are in negotiation with Hawaii and Alaska and a few other states as well. And right now we're looking internationally as well. So we're talking to people.
So at this point, obviously, a person cannot send their sample across a state line. So you have to be in a state where you guys are have an office or one of your sub offices.
Yes.
So is it legal to send it through the U.S. mail?
Well, no, it's not. However, the Hemp Act of 2015, if it's passed, would make it legal, because what we've also done is a significant amount of research to look at the THC content of the pieces that we actually do get from in-state. And we have yet to find any true seedling at the second or third node that has any significant amount of THC. The Hemp Act defines it as 0.3% THC, delta 9 THC.
Mm-hmm.
In general, we see that unless we spike the test where we put in something that's an older leaf, we have yet to get anywhere within an order of magnitude below that. So when we see things 0.01, 0.008, right? So
Gotcha.
We're not even close. So I would say that if we have had people send us from interstate, or rather intrastate, which is within California, which technically should be illegal as well, but we are accepting. We have accepted those because we have done the math, and we are not anywhere near violating any of the federal statutes. So we're fairly comfortable with it. We've done a test that was over 300 random samples, that were sampled from kits that came into us, and at no point were we close. So we're pretty comfortable, and we've actually discussed opening it up for interstate commerce. That would probably put us in the hot water with the feds, and we haven't done it yet. So right now what we're trying to do is open up the program so that we can have the testing equipment required in some of the other states, but it's a fairly large investment. So right now it's we're trying to capitalize that program.
Okay, and you also have another kit for CBD. Am I right on that?
Okay, so it's actually the same kit. So what we did is Gen Kit was actually designed to be a modular testing unit, and so it's the same workflow in-house, and it's the same kit. So from the same leaf, we can give you as many results as you want. So we've just released our CBD test, which is very robust. It actually not only tells you whether it's CBD dominant or not, but we've actually got it to the point where we can tell you what phenotype it is. Is it like AC/DC? Is it like more like a 1-to-1 ratio, or is it something like canatonic or harlequin, which is in between those two? So it's a very robust CBD test. We're working on a number of other tests as well. We have some tests for some of the terpenes, some of the other cannabinoids. Those are still in beta right now, but getting closer to being released as well. But it's all part of GenKit.
Well, this is all getting so exciting. What's coming in the future scientifically with cannabis. To be able to tell, early on if you have a high CBD strain is probably really, really important. Obviously, CBD, works best with a nice amount of THC in it, as far as I know.
Absolutely.
And so I'm really excited about what you're doing. I think there's a gentleman, I can't think of his name, I just read an article the other day in Washington State that's doing DNA mapping.
Yeah,
Mowgli.
So from Philo. So Mowgli, there's us. So Mowgli at Philos, there's us. There's a couple other, genetic experimentation kind of commercialization companies.
Sure.
So Philos, there's Steve Hill, there's John Page at Anandia Lab. So John Page was involved in the very first genetic sequence or DNA sequence for cannabis that was published in 2011, the Purple Kush genome. There's Kevin McKernan's group at I'm not sure whether it's called Medicinal Genomics anymore or Cortigen, but they were involved early in sequencing. Because of the difficulty of research, a lot of these early players couldn't go any further. So it took some of the more privatized companies like Steep Hill and like Philos to be able to come through and continue that research. Unfortunately, I think all of us are facing capitalization problems now.
Sure.
And so it's kind of, it isn't as robust a program as any of us would like it to be. In fact, Mowgli and I have kind of reached out to each other to talk about working together. Steep Hill is actually already part of the Cannabis Genome Research Initiative, which is at the University of Colorado in Boulder with Nolan Kane's group. So what's going to really need to happen to advance this to the point where we are like maize or tomatoes or whatever is for people to get together and collaborate. Right? And so once we do that, we'll get cannabis to the point where it should be as a cash crop. Right. So this is, again, the only cash crop, commercial crop that has absolutely no genetic basis of understanding to it. So we really need to get that fixed so that we can start doing the things that other commercially important crops do, which is marker-assisted breeding, so that we can make it better, do it faster, and get to the point where we can develop medicines that are malady specific, right? So it's possible to do that. We already know that CBD works for certain things. Well, that's why CBD strains are becoming very important. But there are so many other cannabinoids that are also important, like CBG, for instance, which is known to be neuroprotective, and now evidence shows that it's neuroregenerative, right? Which is hugely important, right? So
for Alzheimer's, that would be it.
Exactly, or even other things, so neural tissue supposedly, so brain injury, or you cut a nerve. Well, those things, that's it usually. But if something is neuroregenerative, there's a whole possibility where we might be able to develop medicines that help heal these neural, injuries. And that would be amazing for medicine. Right?
It's all very exciting. I think that the infancy of knowing that this plant is really a medicine. I mean, look, we knew it before 1937 also, but now with the science and the techniques that we have, I think we're way ahead of the game, really. If you look at how fast our industry is growing, I think scientifically we're ahead of any other industry that's new and growing and so forth. So it is all very, very exciting. And I want to thank you. One more question before I let you go. This is sort of on a personal thing. I've got some 40-something-year-old Gold Colombian Santa Marta seeds that won't pop anymore.
Okay.
Any way of getting them to pop, or getting DNA from them that can be saved? Because some of these strains are history.
So actually, we should talk about that, because I actually have one of our beta growers that we use to grow some of the plants that we do our experiments on, because unfortunately in California we can't do that ourselves. We actually have to work with outside growers and breeders because the rules in California say that because I run a testing facility, cannot hold any other license, so I can't actually grow and cultivate, even though it's for research purposes. But he actually has some very old seeds as well that go back to Amsterdam and Neville and all those people, and he actually told me that he has found a way to get some of these things to at least hydrate and pop so that he can get at the radical itself, and then he was able to grow from there. So I don't know much about it specifically. I haven't asked him about it, but he said he's had very good success. So I will be more than happy to get you that information. So.
I would be more than happy to donate some of. I used to have a couple thousand of them, but they disappeared when I had a breakup with one of my girlfriends. But I do have about 20 left, and over the years I've tried to pop them. I've been unable to. The last time they popped, they were seriously from 1971-72. Was around 1996. I haven't been able to pop anything since then. But if anybody would like to contact me, I'd be more than happy to donate this. I would love to save that strain. It was one of the most amazing strains ever. It was a yellow gold Colombian, Santa Marta gold is what it was. And it was probably one of the most psychedelic effects that I've ever had from marijuana. And of course, we're talking about the 70s, and everybody said, oh, the marijuana back then was... not that strong. I think it might have been.
Well, what's interesting is that so two things. So we could be talking all day long here.
I know we could. So we will wrap it up. Go ahead.
All right. But one of the things that I think has happened in the breeding for high THC is what has is some of these strains have lost the entourage molecules that go with it, right? So what we see in a lot of these. And when we do the chemical testing, is we see very high THC strains have very few terpenes, whereas a lot of the old land races and a lot of things that may have only come in at like 8-10% had 8, 9, 10 highly abundant terpenes. Well, things like beta caryophyllene are known to give kind of a more psychedelic effect. It gives you that kind of white noise in the head and a little fractal experience, and alpha humulene and some of the other ones also tend to give you what I call eyelid movies, you close your right.
Sure,
so, so I think what we've done is we've traded the THC high for some of the broad spectrum effects, right? So, and I'm a big proponent of back crossing to land races. So I've been trying to get the breeders that we work with to say, hey, take your 28% THC and breed it with that sucker right there and see what you get, right? You might lose 4 or 5%, but so what? You come up with 22% and 9 terpenes, suddenly you've got something really interesting, right? And what we also need to remember in the cannabis industry is it's not just THC and CBD, right? So we were losing focus of the real strong parts of the medicine. The terpenes, which have been studied for hundreds of years, right? Go back to the fragrance industry, the essential oils, right? We know that a lot of these terpenes have very powerful medicinal effects, antifungal, antibacterial, antiemetic. So there's a lot of stuff that we have lost focus on, and I think really what we need to be doing is taking, now that we have these high THC and high CBD strains, let's lower that percentage a little bit and get back some of the broad, and then we'll see something really incredible happen for medicine at that point.
The future is absolutely incredible, and I want to thank you. Before you go, I want to know what your go-to strain is, whether you are a pipe, a bong, rolling papers. What's your go-to?
I'm old school, so I'm sativa guy.
Me too.
I love sativas, like red Congolese, Trigerian, all those heavy kind of equatorial sativas are what I like. And I'm when I'm at home, it's a bong. When I'm out socially, it's a joint. So.
Okay, and favorite papers?
Are the raws.
The raws. Okay, I want you to try something called Club Modiano. glueless paper made from rice paper. Clubs are made from rice as well. But so this is, I've been using them since the late 70s, early 80s. It's the same paper. It's called Club Modiano Glueless. No glue. It's very thin. You can taste everything. It's amazing. Reggie?
It's funny because I used to use club papers, but they're hard to find in some places. So
I buy them I buy them by the case.
Okay.
But so I'll just show you those on the screen.
Got it. I know what it looks like.
So
Cool.
anyway, Reggie Gaudino, I thank you very much for your passion. I thank you for sharing your knowledge today with Medical Marijuana Radio. And I thank Steep Hill for having this great test. And everybody can go to Steep Hill's website, which is it steephilllabs.com?
It's just steephill.com.
Steephill.com. Check it out. It's $130 for 8 tests. If you want to do more, they'll give you a sliding scale. And I'm very excited about it. Reggie, thank you very much.
Thanks, Larry. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. We'll be right back after this.
Mana 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 na 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 na. Well, plant the good seed, smoke the good calibre. Ooh well, whoa. Plant the good seed, smoke the good calibre. Oh well, yeah. Day after day they are burning bush, trying so hard to feel so stush. Amen. Take a tip from me. All we want is a real sensei, so got to plant the good seed, smoke the good calibre. Ooh, well, whoa, got to plant the good seed, smoke the good calibre. Oh, well, yeah, the price is rising all the time, sensei mean it's getting hard to find. There's nothing more that I'd rather see than a weight of the real sensei, so got to plant the good seed, smoke the good calibre. Ooh, well, whoa, got to plant the good seed, smoke the good calibre. Oh, well, yeah, yeah. Mana, 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 no, 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 no. Sensei mania is what we want. In a dance hall we love to chow. Tell your uncle go and tell your aunt. All we want is a sensei plant, so got to plant a good seed and smoke the good calibre. Ooh, well, whoa, got to plant a good seed and smoke the good calibre. Oh, well, yeah, the price is rising all the time. Sensei mean's getting hard to find. There's nothing more that I'd rather see than the weight of the real sensei, so got to plant a good seed and smoke the good calibre. Ooh, well, whoa, got to plant a good seed and smoke the good calibre. Oh, well, yeah. Mana, 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 no, 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 no. Day after day they are burning bush, trying so hard to feel so stuck. The medical marijuana. The medical marijuana. Radio. Radio. Show.
Thank you, Reggie Gaudino, for giving us all this great science, and thank you, Steep Hill, for being involved with everything that you guys do. I also want to thank my 2 radio mentors, both with the initials HS. Thank you for your inspiration. If you have any ideas for shows, topics, guests, if you have a product, a website you'd like to promote, write us at info@mmjradio.com. Again, that's info@mmjradio.com. If you'd like to listen to old shows, we're in our 7th season right now. We've done about over 300 shows. Go to mmjradio.com. My YouTube channel is LSLove88. Also on Spreaker, it's MMJ Radio. On iHeartRadio, it's the Time for Hemp Global Broadcasting Network. Cannabistube.net. We post our show every week. On Now TV, channel 937. Also on SoundCloud, it's MMJ Radio, and Spreaker, MMJ Radio and Time for Hemp plays our shows. 420radio.org and the Pothead Universe Radio Sunday mornings around 9 a.m. or 10 a.m. I'm not sure.
Shalom.
Peace.
Bapu buyeta, suyeta ba, bapu dini, sa bapu 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 bapu.